from Fred Meyer. And his question is, to a great extent, one can argue that the climate crisis is a political problem that requires political solutions. On the other hand, many activists are taking matters into their own hands, developing and deploying renewable technologies, working around existing state laws and structures. So how should activists approach this strategic problem, given that the states have so much power to determine our collective future?
I feel like it's a very good question, and it's also something which I've been observing in the last few years that I've been involved with the UN climate process. And that is, on one hand, we don't see adequate actions from the state as actors. And on the other hand, we see growth of all kinds of activities and initiatives of various levels, be it like subnational states, be it cities, companies, communities. And the question which came to my mind after the last UN conference was exactly the same. I mean, we have all these community efforts and private initiatives. How do they all come together? Do they really have an impact? And do they really contribute a lot to solving climate crisis? And I feel like it's a good thing, like it's a very good and important thing, but I would answer like we need both. The thing is, we need both. We need both like me actions. What can I, as private individual, as community, as I don't know, whatever company can do. But then we also need to continue lobbying and trying to influence larger actors in the sector to make right decisions for infrastructure investments, business requirements, legislation, like everything. So
Right.
my feeling is like we need both. I mean, it's also clear that our time is like so limited. Like we unfortunately we don't have more than 24 hours in the day. But then yeah. So if you do one thing, it's also good. But I feel like for the solving of climate crisis and for really changing the way we build our future, we need both.
Yeah, we discussed this in the meeting that we had in Monterey, the dialogue in effect,
Definitely, yeah.
really what our personal responses to climate crisis, and now that we're well into this global crisis in the coronavirus pandemic, we can see how sort of states and individuals work together to deal with a very, very serious crisis, but it's one where it's, you know, you might die tomorrow if you're if you're not careful. And yeah, I think that there's been an interesting sort of cooperation between states and individuals, even though they haven't. I mean, there's also been very serious clashes. Like I think yesterday there was, I don't know, 1,200 people or so, you know, clashing with police in California because they want to reopen the economy, right?
Right. Wow. Where about was it?
Southern California. I'd have to look on the news. I'm gonna say it was in Ventura County, but don't quote me on that. But the interesting thing is that individuals have taken personal responsibility to protect themselves and other people by informing themselves and quickly developing cottage industry to make more masks, and you know, the government's being coerced in some ways into making more, well, giving people money first of all, and then making medical equipment in a hurry, and literally the entire planet shut down. And a lot of people have raised this question, like, well, what if we responded to the climate crisis like that, you know?
Right.
It just seems like the tectonic movement of the climate crisis just doesn't feel close enough and scary enough. But yeah, I agree that we need both.
Yeah, and it's also like very often with like consequences of climate crisis, we tend to speak about like 50 years or 100 years, right? It's not like tomorrow. And likewise, there is also all this data that even if we bring down our emissions next to zero tomorrow, it will still not help to rebalance the whole climate system, because it's not that fast, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, right, I mean, what we see now is that humankind is somehow, it's okay in reacting to very urgent causes, but when it takes and when it speaks about something which is more slow, we often don't know what to do and how to build up our actions and change our attitudes and our daily habits.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the thoughts which I was having because of the reactions to coronavirus was that I feel like before the pandemic, there were, roughly speaking, two kinds of reactions towards any kind of environmental crisis. One was more about behavior, be it personal behavior or political behavior or whatever, and another one was more about technology. Like, let's invent an technological solution to CO2. Let's invent an app which helps you, whatever.
Yeah.
And behavioral was more about, let's think about how we can consume less. Let's think about how we can restructure our daily habits. Let's think about how we can share things instead of owning them. And I feel like and it's also a question to you, but like coming from a, large urban, like, being a very urban person and coming from a highly urbanized areas, I feel like this crisis, the coronavirus crisis, it puts a large question mark to behavioral solutions.
Yeah.
Because many of them were the ones that don't work in current conditions, like all sharing economy issues, or consuming less, or less packaging, or less plastic, or whatever. Like, I mean, what we see now is a huge growth in consumption of plastic, of various kinds of, packaging, wrapping, or one, disposables. And that's also a huge question to me. I mean, like, so many environmental groups have been working for so many years and trying to reduce the use of plastics and trying to use your own cup when going to a coffee shop. And now, like, what happens now? Like, how is it going to change our consumption habits? Will it still be relevant? I mean, that's an open question. So in a way, behavioral approaches and behavioral solutions are under question to me now, even though I love them a lot, and I thought they were the ones which are to be more sustainable, but then virus came, right? And the technological solutions, to me, they always seemed like, all right, so we'll invent this app which whatever solves this thing. For me, it always seemed a bit too insufficient. But it looks like in many ways, technological solutions are coming to the forefront now. And I wonder what it means.
So what technological solutions can you pull off the top of your head that would fit that bill?
I mean, anything from sucking in of CO2, like from geoengineering,
Right.
up till I don't know, apps which are what kind of, I mean, the ones which have been in really popular before the pandemic were mainly about how you as a private individual can decrease your own CO2 emission.
Right. Right.
And they are not really relevant.
Right.
So in a way, the ones which remain relevant are mainly about how to decrease CO2 emissions as a technological process, or like
Right.
suck in CO2 emissions from the atmosphere, or
Yeah, there was a company in Silicon Valley, I think, that's developing a technology where they can really reclaim CO2 from the atmosphere and compress it into a reusable fuel, which
yeah.
to me sounds outrageous, but apparently the technology is proven. But don't we need to sort of attenuate the CO2 emissions in any case, and really, we've seen, like, because of this pandemic crisis, we've seen emissions almost go down to like barely measurable amounts because nobody's driving around, there's no production happening, and or very little.
Planes don't fly, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's shocking that wildlife is coming into the cities and the air is clear in Los Angeles, and it's just like we can't expect it to stay like that. But attenuating the CO2 emissions at the source seems like a 1-2 punch of, like, let's first stop the bleeding and then we put the band-aid on, or the really try to basically make it a synergistic approach to solving the bulk of the crisis, which is we just keep dumping more stuff into the air. And I don't know. I mean, I would like to know, since we last talked, we're really talking about behavioral modification, like what we should expect, and what the economy, what the economic exchanges should be in order to keep it on track to, like, not destroying the planet.
Yeah.
But this was way before we actually saw something so so globally effective of just stopping everything for a month.
I mean, I feel like it's a good example, and it's also, in a way, it's a good experiment.
Yeah.
What happens if we stop? And we didn't stop for a good reason. We actually stopped for a very bad reason.
Yeah.
But then we can still observe the results of it. And it's an interesting observation. It's an observation that if we actually react and if we put on effort, something happens. Like emissions go down, emissions of greenhouses go down, emissions of polluting substances go down, air becomes clearer. Now the question is, will it only take us a bad reason to do that, or can we also do it for a good reason?
Mm-hmm.
And where's that borderline in human behavior between, like, limitation and, like, bad limitation, and then also, like, good motivation to do things?
Well, it's the only motivation I can really discern among both the leadership and the people is the economy. Like, everybody just really wants to get back to some sort of normal, and I think in scrutinizing what normal is, we have to also kind of realize that normal has been very abnormal if we're talking about the ecosystems, and that we still have to, we have this like expectation that normal means we can go down to the store and get a brick of cheese, And we talked about cheese a lot last time, so I
Yeah,
thought
right, yeah.
little tip of the hat to the cheese. But the expectations driving the economy are the things that both cause a great deal of growth and positive growth, and obviously the negative part too. But going back into this perceived normal without scrutinizing that is going to be more of the same, and more of the same problems and increasing problems.
Right. So the question is, how can we go back not to normal, but like to the new normal? To the new normal, which will also include environmental factors and factors of our influence into the outside world. Because if we saw one crisis coming, we can now possibly even easier imagine other crises coming. I mean, at least that's what the hope is for.
Yeah.
And the question is, how can we build our communities, our cities, our countries, our economies, infrastructure, whatever, to be more resilient to whatever risks are possible. And like one of the main risks foreseen is anyway negative consequences of climate change, right?
Yeah. And those are, they're officially disputed in the American government right now, but I think that it's pretty much not a matter of dispute that climate change is A, man-made, and B, is happening, and C, will devastate major ecosystems everywhere, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I studied Russian history for a while and in college, and something brings to mind this sort of mass societal changes during World War II that were necessary to beat the Nazis. And what Russia has this history of being able to reinvent its industrial infrastructure very quickly. And do you think that that's possible now in light of this global crisis?
Well, I feel like it's not only applicable to Russia, it's actually applicable to many other countries and humankind in general, that whatever crisis we had, be it pandemic or the world war or any other like large economic crisis, societies and economies were trying to think about how can we adapt to it, but also how can we change ourselves so that we'll be more prone to further threats coming. And I feel like it's not a particular national characteristic. It's more about, humankind in general, and about how do we, like, what kind of solutions, like even like design solutions, and design, speaking very broadly of what design is. From like everyday design of objects which are around us up till design of decision making.
Right. Yeah.
This is going to change. This is going to change a lot. Like which factors are going to be taken in consideration when you speak about future.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that the design science was the solution according to Buckminster Fuller.
Right.
It's just like the political structures aren't going to be able to solve this because XYZ. They're too bureaucratic. They're too bogged down with too many problems. They can't see the solution or the forest for the trees. But what's really interesting about living in this Earthship is that this is a design solution. It's no new technology here. In fact, it's mostly cave, which is like the original design, like get out of the rain, be in a cave. It's really like a cave, but with some nice glass on the front. But it's a design solution, and it works. It's incredible. It works. Like, we went through an entire 2 seasons so far, and the house is comfortable. It uses almost no fossil fuels. I mean, very little fossil fuels for cooking and heating water. All the water comes from the sky. All the electricity comes from the solar, and it works. It's incredible. So that's just one version of this design science solution. But I think, just to come back to Fred's question, I think grassroots or individual initiatives to take existing technology and be allowed to put them together in a certain way to demonstrate it and to do it is something pretty remarkable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, the questions I have here is, as usual, the questions of scaling up. Like, can we really put 3 billion of India plus China into Earthships?
That's the question. That's the $1 million question. You can't just build them overnight. They take about 2 or 3 years to build each one.
And also takes land.
Yeah.
And it's also about land usage, and it's also about resources, and it's also about, right? I mean, for a country like Russia, in a way, I mean, Russia's version of Earthship can be a solution, because we also have negative demographics, and we have many areas which are getting depopulated.
Yeah.
But then for the countries where population keeps growing,
right.
How do you make a version of multi-storage Earthship?
Well, there's been some talk about how to retrofit high rises with this type of design. You're right. It doesn't scale very well. So the point being, not so much that everybody should move out to the land and live in an Earthship, but that fairly simple low-tech design changes can be sort of synthesized and repurposed in urban areas and in the general population. So it doesn't necessarily mean changing the way that the building structures are, but that design implementations need to be allowed and given a little bit more credibility for their ability to solve problems at this level.
Yeah. And after all, it's always been that those are the ones who tried it, the ones who tried something new, like the pioneers. They were the ones who made a great impact on society. I mean, no matter if you're just a handful of people trying something new, you will have a great influence on the way societies click. Maybe not very quick one, maybe also not a very direct one, but then even like many of Buckminster Fuller ideas, even if they didn't come directly as he has foreseen them, they still were relevant and they still were very important.
Yeah.
For the role of design, construction, overall organization of life.
Yeah.
And we had this over the last couple of weeks. I've been involved in a number of talks with architects and urban planners about the cities of tomorrow. And there are like so many ideas circulating at the moment, from ideas that hygiene becomes such an important factor, and air purificators and air quality, up till ideas that we everyone, like every person is going to be responsible for his or her health, and that kind of responsibility of like, what do I carry in me as a human being?
Right.
So it's a kind of it's almost like a legal responsibility. Till like further ideas that people might reconsider like very dense settlements, and try to change them for like less dense settlements, even though over the last, say, 20 to 30 years, the environmental thought have always been more dense settlements for larger populations are actually good because they are more energy and resource efficient.
Sure.
But then now, once again, they can be reconsidered. But then how do we deal with like Earth ecosystems, and how do we deal with the fact that we still have to leave large areas of Earth untouched?
Definitely.
If we want to go for less density.
Right. Yeah, and actually, it all comes to my mind. That comes back to energy, and energy is the resource that that needs to be in place and needs to be consistent in order to keep dense, large settlements alive and small ones. It's really comes down to the energy usage and transport of the energy, and
Right.
that's always the kind of the linchpin. And speaking of that, I watched Michael Moore's new movie, which got released like a week ago.
I didn't see it. No, I didn't see it yet.
Well, I think you'd be interested in it. It's controversial because it apparently has a lot of assumptions about how much it costs to produce alternative energy and what technologies are energy intensive to manufacture. But I would say that generally the idea is that we need to be watchful because it's very easy to mislead people en masse about what is actually green energy and what is the cost of doing it, and certain types of energy production are obfuscated by what they're called, particularly biomass. So
Right, yeah.
There's a lot of hypocrisy in the higher up level. So that's what we need to be watchful of, I think.
And likewise, I mean, I didn't see that film yet, but I read a lot about it. But I also felt like, in a way, it speaks to an idea that there can be a quick technological fix. Like, let's all go for one type of energy, like 3 types of energy, right? Let's all go, this is a fix. Like, if you do this, it's like perfect. I mean, as with most engineering solutions or technical solutions, it only works until a certain level, and it also usually has negative external effects, like negative externalities. And the next stage of the solution will probably try to solve these externalities, but it's also in a way important to bring attention to the problems which are out there, right? With this or that solution. Not saying that any technological solution is perfect, but saying that, look, it's okay for now, but then we need to move further and we need to realize what kind of negative impacts it has and how can we deal with them.
Right. And we're, generally individuals are trapped in whatever energy solutions are available or made available by the government or the infrastructure at large, the industry that provides it. So, for example, my gasoline engine car, I can't put, olive oil in the tank. It's really just what's provided. And it's very interesting to me to be somewhat energy autonomous. I mean, not completely energy autonomous now, but the idea that multiple different fuels could make this operation still work, you know, and not necessarily just relying on gasoline. But I mean, if we have a propane tank, so if for some reason propane was not available anymore, we still have solar hot water and we have wood, and we can still survive here without any fossil fuels. Not a great example, because I would really hate having to warm my water with wood heat, but perhaps, you know, and speaking of design solutions, that energy autonomy might be more at an individual or a community level.
Right. I've been reading a lot about it recently, also since even the like very conservative International Energy Agency came up with this idea that now, as the oil prices became negative, the oil markets and also other fossil fuel markets are becoming very volatile and are becoming very flexible. In a way, maybe we don't need all these like super large scale energy solutions. And the best way would be just what you are saying, and that is going for decentralized local energy solutions.
Right. Yeah. There's some examples of that around. One of, I think it's a community, it's either planned or it's in use, but doing something like a microgrid where the community shares battery storage. And right now, all of these buildings around here, they have their own batteries, and there's no sharing. But about halfway through the day, we go into a state which is called float, in which the panels are making more energy than we can use, and we can't store it because the batteries are full. So it just goes away. We don't use it. But if we had a local grid and we stored all the energy on site, that would be extra energy that's available to do, you know, more work or charge cars, or I don't know. It's really a matter of being smart about how much energy comes into the system each day. And if we have a week of cloudy days, then, you know, everybody can draw from this stored energy.
Right. Yeah. This is exactly where solutions are needed, right? This is exactly where you need technology to step up and say, look, we can solve this. We can help you.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it puts just a little bit more attention and responsibility on the individual or smaller groups of individuals rather than a global industry. And just the notion possible is pretty great. But implementing it means changing some laws, I think, and changing some, really, you know, educating people, I think, that it's possible, demonstrating it, showing it off, and then making it economically possible for smaller groups of people or individuals.
Yeah. I could just totally agree with it, right?
Well, great. that feels validating.